Good to see you, everyone. My name is Robbie Howell, and I have with me an extremely special guest who has an enormous amount of clout within the AoE3 scene, here to talk to me a bit about what distinguishes AoE3 from AoE2. Think of it as a primer for AoE2 players who are interested in getting into their older brother game. Would you mind introducing yourself, my friend?
Yes, of course. I am known as Hoop Thrower. Others of you may know me as Chumbeke. I didn't completely make the mod, but I worked on the mod called Wars of Liberty for Age of Empires 3. I worked in the predecessor to that, which is the War of the Triple Alliance. I've made mods for Age of Empires 2, StarCraft, Command and Conquer, Civilization 5, 6. I've been around, let's say. I've also worked on Paradox games professionally. I still can't believe it either. But yeah, I can call myself a professional game designer now, at least.
Hell yeah, man. That's better than I can say. Your pedigree really needs hardly any introduction. It really is an honor to be able to speak with you. And just to give you a very rough introduction to my knowledge of Age of Empires 3, I have never once played it, and I have watched maybe all of an hour's worth of footage of it. And I wouldn't be surprised if many of my viewers are in a similar boat. From what I can tell, it seems to be a very interesting game that is a lot more complicated than Age of Empires 2, takes a lot more risks, and has much more varied mechanics, kind of pushing the envelope in a way that I try to do on my channel, but it did it like 20 odd years ago.
I'm not sure if complicated is the word. I'd say Age of Empires 3 is more... It's basically an evolution of Age of Mythology. It's like a step further than Age of Mythology and a step before Age of Empires Online, which is also another game that has a cult following that's not that known either.
It's a game I've only ever heard of and never seen footage of before. Just off the rip, I know there's a lot of different pieces to an Age of Empires 3 civilization. I hear words like cards thrown around a lot, which scares me as a simple-minded Age of Empires 2 player. So would you mind, in very broad strokes, going over some of the major mechanical differences in terms of just civilization design between Age of Empires 3 and 2?
The way I like to see it with Age of Empires 2 the civilization designs, it's almost granular. Like you give a few changes to the tech tree, you give incremental bonuses like percentages and stuff. When you design a civilization, an Age of Empires 3 civilization, it's more like you come with an elevator pitch and build entire civilization around that. Like the Ottomans, they don't train their villagers, they are made automatically. You mentioned home cities, cards, basically. This is the main element that makes Age of Empires 3 unique. You perform actions through the game, gathering resources, constructing buildings, training units, killing any enemy units in general. You accumulate this resource called experience. Once you accumulate enough of this resource called experience, you get home city achievements. Because the game, at least initially, was themed around building a new colony in the Americas. You have your home city, which you have to build before you enter a game, where you have a collection of 130 cards. You can build a deck of cards that is 25 normally. And these cards are things you can send from the home city and give you resources, units, or bonuses, basically. This is where you can see things like your infantry gets 10% more hit points, or your villagers collect berries 20% faster.
So you're kind of like building your civilization on the fly as you play.
Yeah, you can say that. Here's where you also see some elements from Age of Mythology as well.
I know Age of Mythology quite well, and I do remember in the very little footage of Age of Empires 3 I saw, you do a very similar thing to selecting a god in that game, where you pick a dude when you age up, and then you get a bonus based on it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the thing with Age of Empires 3 is that you have not one, but 4 different tech trees. European, Africans, Native Americans, and then there's the Asians. Europeans, for example, choose these politicians to work the same as the minor gods from Age of Mythology. Africans pick alliances. Asians, instead of choosing a politician, they construct a wonder. This is really messy because you end up building the literal Taj Mahal in, I don't know, Texas.
Yeah, it's a little silly. But,
Yeah.
they tried. That kind of gets into another thing that I've been curious about. Would you say that Age of Empires 3 has more historical authenticity than Age of Empires 2? Or is it just as goofy?
I'd say it's just as goofy, but it has the advantage that most, if not every, Home City achievement, for example, is a historical reference.
Nice. So there's like a lot more places that you can put historical references into a build because builds just have a lot more going on.
Yeah, that's completely correct. There's also the fact that you don't have like a unique unit. The unique units depend on the civilization. Some have more, some have less. Some civilizations have completely unique rosters.
Just so I can wrap my head about this, if you're making an Age of Empires 3 civilization, you have unique units, you have a core gimmick. Do they all have completely unique cards and like age up options as well?
Not necessarily. There are some cards that are shared through certain civilizations. Each of choices normally are shared. For example, all four Native Americans share the same set of 5 politicians.
So you have some shared elements within a given cultural group. The unique units are pretty much entirely unique. The cards are also sometimes shared, sometimes unique, and then you have a unique gimmick. Are there other pieces to the civilization besides those 4?
Kinda. As I said, there's like there's 4 different technology trees, so there's a lot of different elements. Oh yeah, for example, the colonial Americans, Mexico and United States, instead of choosing politicians, they have states they choose to edge up with.
That's kind of cool. So yeah, it
Yeah.
seems like you really do have a lot more ability for a civilization to be unique. Along those same lines, in Age of Empires 2, oftentimes units are very similar to each other with only 1 or 2 small tweaks. Are there major differences between Age of Empires 3 units, or are they mostly just kind of different iterations of stats rather than them having like major mechanical distinguishers between them?
So there's 2 different approaches to this. So the standard units are much easier to keep track of. The amount of unique units each civilization has can vary depending on basically the design you want to give the civilization. So like the Swedish Karolian, which technically replaces the musketeer, but it has, instead of having more melee armor, it has more ranged armor, and it moves faster and does more damage in melee than in range. Oh yeah, that's something I completely forgot. Units in Age of Empires 3, the ranged units have a melee attack and a ranged attack.
Ah, I love it.
This helps balance somewhat because, for example, musketeers have a multiplier against cavalry only melee. In range, they do normal damage.
Oh, because bayonets and shit. Nice. And there's also siege damage in the game, right? Where units don't just hit buildings with their sword, they throw like burning things at it.
Yeah, that's true. That's also something I have forgotten.
Yeah, I'm sure it's like obvious to you at this point, but to me this is very different.
Yeah, so many things that are different that it's basically explaining a completely new game.
Absolutely. I want to turn it over to you. Tell me about other things that you think are very relevant for Age of Empires 2 players to know if they are interested in trying out 3, both mechanically and otherwise.
So the way I see these games is that Age of Empires 2 is more like strategical. Like your micromanagement is more important. The counter system is easier to grasp, I believe. Age of Empires 3, I say it's more like a fighting game. It's more like you must pull a combo. You must hit your timings so your shipments arrive at a certain time, and basically try to make the most broken thing possible as fast as possible, and hope your player can do anything more broken.
Wow. So in some ways, build orders are way more important in AoE3, which would be a barrier to entry for like a new competitive player. Is that what I'm hearing?
It's almost impossible to play Age of Empires 3 really competitively. There's too many variables to take into account.
Yeah.
In fact, I say Mexico is like the perfect anti-try-hard civilization because Mexico has this really funny gimmick where instead of aging up like normal, you can go on a revolution, which basically means you completely discard your deck of cards that you built and get a completely new one from scratch.
Wow. So if you don't have like all the cards unlocked, if that's a thing, it's just like fuck it, I get to play with it whatever ones I want. A random assortment.
Yeah.
It's the Hearthstone civilization.
It's almost impossible for the other player to guess what Mexico is gonna do.
That's wild. So on one hand, the game is very much about like build orders and combos, but on the other hand, it's extremely hard, if not impossible, to optimize.
There's probably people who can play this game competitively and they can optimize builds, but there's always something in a new patch or something someone found and throws everything established about competitive game completely out of the window. It happens every few months.
Are there other game fundamentals that are major differences for an AoE2 player? Like we talked about units having siege attacks where they attack buildings differently than they attack units, and how ranged units also have a melee attack. Are there other things like that that could really throw an AoE2 player for a loop?
Oh, there's a lot of those things. Especially in the Definitive Edition, there's a lot of new things you don't see coming. Some units do poison damage. Malta has a building that explodes and kills everybody around it. There's economic buildings, like the factory, can produce resources over time. Auras are much more common as well.
Yeah.
Each ancient wonder has a unique ability to themselves.
A lot of what I'm seeing Age of Mythology Retold adding to the game already has precedent in AoE3.
Yeah, as I said, AoE3 takes more from Age of Mythology than from Age of Empires 2, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, in that case, does it have mechanics like snaring, where infantry units, if they hit you, they slow you down? Is that a thing in...
Yes.
Okay, that's
indeed. They made a unit that couldn't be snared, and it was completely broken. They had to patch it.
Oh, wow. So snaring is that important. That's another thing that I've noticed whenever people talk to me about AoE3, is there is so much bonus damage going on, and it is so confusing. It's not obvious why units have bonus damage in many cases. I mean, the one you said earlier about musketeers getting bonus damage against cavalry in melee, that makes sense, because you know the bayonet on the musket, right? But some of these really feel kind of obtuse to me when I've heard them before. Is there a trick for figuring out the bonus damage, or do you just need to memorize it? And is it consequential?
The game technically has a basic counter system. Heavy infantry is good against cavalry, but bad against light infantry and artillery. But
Jeez.
There's hundreds of units in the game, so there's a lot of exceptions.
Yeah. I don't know if you ever tried the game Empire Earth before. Goofy fucking game. But that in the strategy guide, Empire Earth had like a counter chart, and it was one of the dumbest counter charts I've ever seen in my life because of how many different ages there are and how many different units there are. So there are like 30 things on the counter chart with arrows going everywhere, and I just think of that when I hear about AoE3 counters. They're just so many different variables, which is honestly great. I really like how many pieces there are in play, because it means that the game is way harder to solve. And that's something I find that AoE2 has struggled with, is that unless there's a change made that deliberately shakes up the game, it is kind of solved, and not like truly solved. Obviously the meta still develops, but people play at a very high level now, and it's hard to break in with new strategies and ideas that go against the grain just because of how streamlined the metagame is. Have you ever noticed anything even kind of like this in AoE3, or is it just completely freeform?
No, I completely agree. Age of Empires 2 feels like a much more solved game. It's much easier to predict what's going on in the game. Age of Empires 3, I always advise people to take it more like a party game. There's a competitive scene. There's people who like know most, if not all, of the counters, but it's not solved by any means.
Yeah.
So, as I said, there's a lot of things I haven't touched on yet. Like markets, right? The market essentially works the same as Age of Empires 2, unless you play an African civilization. You know why?
Why?
because the African civilization have these herdable units, like sheep, cows, etc. You can sell them at the market for any resource.
So you just like throw cows on the market and get whatever you want.
Yes, and these animals fatten over time. I think this is also present in Age of Mythology.
That's an Age of
where
Mythology
it is,
thing, yeah.
and you get more resources back the more you wait.
Having done a ton of African history research recently, quite appropriate for a lot of Africa through a lot of its history. So commendable, but geez, that's so goddamn different. And I'm sure the game is loaded with those sorts of weird exceptions. I will say, one of the other things that kind of threw me off about AoE3 is the numbers are so big. So I was like, hey, look at my musket man, Rob. It has like fucking 400 HP. I'm like, how? Why does it have such a big number?
Everything in Age of Empires 3 starts at the 3 digits. Like villagers cost 100 food. Musketeers have 150 hit points, and at least upgrades are easy to keep track of. So when you get Imperial Musketeers, they have double the normal stats. So
Yeah.
this begin with 150, they end up with 300. Oh yeah, that's something I completely have not mentioned that probably is important. There's probably people watching the video complaining about this. There's native sites and there's trade routes. Yeah, so this is something your heroes can do, which is build trading posts in trade routes, which provide you resources. They begin with experience, which is the most important resource, especially early in the game, because you get your achievements faster. You can upgrade them. You can eventually get trains going. It's really neat. And there's these native sites. In the old days, these were built by the heroes, but in the definitive edition, they changed it where you can construct the building automatically if you have 100 food and 100 wood and control over that site. What this does is that you ally, quote unquote, with a native place, and they provide a few units and a few technologies depending on the map. Sometimes there's like powers you can activate. I haven't even mentioned naval combat either, which is really weird. Even
God damn it. Okay, you got to tell me now, because I mean, in AoE 2, I would say naval combat is one of the weakest parts of the game. So hopefully in AoE 3, it's at least more interesting.
No, it's worse.
Oh, god damn it.
So basically, you have a small chip, a middle chip, and a big chip, and a siege chip.
Nice. Great.
Bigger chip beats smaller chip. And
What?
that's the counter system. It's like a little more than that. Like the middle chip, they train units.
Oh.
So you can sneak on the coast where they can see you and train barrack units or stable units.
So you have the middle ship that's able to train units, and then the small ship, which is presumably cheap and shitty, and then the big ship, which eats everything, and the siege ship, which blows things up from afar. Roughly correct?
Roughly correct, yes. And then the definitive edition brought the really big chip, the battle chip, which you look, I don't remember if in Industrial or Imperial Age, and they just kill everything. There's no dedicated transport chip. Every kind of chip, except for fishing boats, can transport like 50 units. It's insane in number. Yeah, so most naval maps are trivial.
So a naval map is mostly going to be about just landing units rather than fighting on water.
Yeah, that's and that's why nobody likes to play in naval maps.
Yeah,
it's
that
just
sounds
cheese.
that sounds so freaking janky. God damn it. Someday we're going to have an Age game with actually good water combat, but it's not today. A lot of people who watch my channel are not competitive players, and they will often not do much multiplayer. They'll play single player skirmishes against like an AI, or they'll do campaigns. And so I've heard a lot of weird stuff about the AoE3 campaign. I know it's fictional, and I've heard some people say it's awesome, and some people say that it's dumb. I'd love to hear your review of the campaign and whether there is other good like custom campaigns and fan-made campaigns out there, as well as how the AI is for single player against computer random map style content.
Oh, I have a lot to say about this. So the original campaigns before the definitive edition take a lot more from Age of Mythology than from Age of Empires. They are more like historical fiction.
Yeah.
To be kind, Basically, the original campaigns by the original developers follow the story of the Black family. So you play the Scottish knight defending from the Ottomans who are invading the island, and the Ottomans accidentally blow up a wall in a cave that reveal a map to the Fountain of Youth.
Nice. Okay.
So you must embark to the Americas to find this Fountain of Youth before the Ottomans do. Then you move to the next campaign where you are the descendant of this Scottish knight, and you are forever doubtful or whether this was the real Fountain of Youth or not. So you follow the story of this mercenary who's the grandson of the Scottish knight, and the Cyclophasus comes back to the American colonies, and they have this quest to defeat the Black family, and they bring Russian mercenaries for some reason who are crossing into the Americas, and you must defeat them before the Russians conquer the world. And then you play the granddaughter of this person. The campaign starts with the Mexican-American War, but suddenly you're fighting the Colombian Independence War with some Simon Bolivar there for some reason. Then you move to the Andes, and the Inca are still there for some reason. I don't know either. And the Russians are there because the Cyclophasus is there, and you must defeat them. And then you move to Cuba because the Cyclophasus is also there, and the United States Navy arrives and they defeat the Cyclophasus finally, and everybody is happy. And turns out that Morgan Black was alive this whole time because the Fountain of Youth it was real.
Oh my god. Fucking hell. It's like Pirates of the Caribbean meets the Da Vinci Code. That's so goofy.
Yes, exactly.
You know, I'm sure it's charming. I'm sure it has its perks. To me, that does not sound particularly fun.
Even back then in 2005, a lot of people complained about this campaign because it was fantasy.
Yeah. And are these things long? Like Age of Empires 2 campaigns are like 5 or 6 scenarios, but Age of Mythology is like 30 something. So how long are these campaigns?
Closer to Age of Empires 2 campaigns. Okay. And then there's the ancient campaigns. Basically, the ancient dynasties was made by a different studio, which is why the ancient civilizations are so weird.
I see.
So the Japanese campaign is the Sengoku period. It's really pretty historical. The Chinese campaign is about the treasure fleet of Zheng He, but instead of going to Africa, you go to America because the admiral wants to take over the Aztec Empire.
Wait a second. Zheng He was from like the 1400s.
Yes.
God, fuck. Head meet desk.
And there's an Indian campaign about the Sepoy Rebellion. It's probably one of the best, at least narratively. It's also the hardest. The definitive edition didn't bring campaigns, but they have historical scenarios around a specific topic. You play historical characters. It's closer to what you see in Age of Empires 2.
I'm glad to hear that there is some historical stuff there as well, both for my own personal proclivities, but also because the era that Age of Empires 3 is set in is so interesting and textured, and we know so much about it because, you know, it's closer to modern times. It just feels like such a shame that we weren't able to explore that history as thoroughly in the campaigns as we do in 2, when I feel like if they had committed to that route, they could have really had some truly fantastic material to work with. Well, I don't know if you have as strong opinions as I do about that, but it does feel like a missed opportunity to me.
To me as well. I believe, at least that's what I heard, is that this game was never meant to be Age of Empires 3. This was meant to be a spin-off, and that's why they took so many liberties, and they just had to shoehorn the brand's name into it, and that's why there's so many strange design decisions. So in the definitive edition, there's the expansion DLC whatever you want to call it, called Knights of the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
This brought historical battles. These are meant to be played in multiplayer.
Ooh, that's great.
Yeah, these are really nice and gives me a lot of hopes for the future of the game, at least. Now, for the skirmish game, like single player, you know how in Age of Empires 2 you get this set of random names to play against the computer?
Yes, I know.
In Age of Empires 3, you always play against the same personality,
Uh-huh.
but each personality has personality. They have a lot of recorded voice lines, and they react to the things you do in the game.
That's so
And they
cool.
surrender. Yeah.
Do they like behave differently too? Like, are they different, like aggressive, defensive, whatever, or is it mostly for flavor?
Mostly for flavor, although the artificial intelligence got a lot of upgrades for the definitive edition. As a modder, it was really funny for me because when I used to mod the old version of the game, if you opened the I files, it had a lot of we have to complete this later. Yeah, so the personality of the computer eyes feels much more alive now.
Yeah, I heard that there was some new civilizations announced, like Poland and Denmark or something like that. Is there any more news on that? Do you have any particular hopes or interests for this sort of DLC? And what does this sort of DLC mean for the future of AoE3? Like, I'm sure it's great to get support, but it doesn't seem to be like talked about at all outside of very specifically the AoE3 bubble, which has a lot of speculation, but not a lot to like go off of.
Oh my god, the thing is that not even the AoE3 community is really hopeful for this.
Oh,
You know why?
why?
Because the announcement was 2 seconds on the screen to show the flags, and they moved on.
God damn it. Yeah, I heard it was really, really short and stunted.
That was it. That was the announcement. They literally didn't say anything. They flashed 2 flags on the screen, and that was the announcement. HFFI 3 gone.
That's
And they
so
have
sad.
said not a single word since then.
Shit. Okay, well, I mean, that must be demoralizing, but like, I don't know. Are there any like pluses to come out of this? You told me Knights of Malta was quite good, which is what made me think of this. So like, yeah, what is the sentiment for the future of 3 from what people in the community like seem to be saying?
Everybody always feels like Age of Empires 3 is the forgotten son of the franchise
Yeah.
because it's between Age of Empires 2, which is the game everybody knows and everybody plays, and in Age of Empires 4, which is newer, it gets more coverage in press, it
Yeah.
gets more tournaments and stuff. So I don't know, Age of Empires 3 players always feel forgotten. The fact that a new expansion is coming, even if they have said nothing, give us good hopes for the future of the game. Knights of the Mediterranean brought a lot of content, even if Malta was like I don't want to be mean, but it felt like an asset of civilization.
Shit.
It brought like a lot of assets from the campaigns and put them in the game. Like, look, it's the game is civilization. Don't you find it fun? To be
Uh-huh.
fair, the expansion also brought Italians. That's completely new content.
Nice.
Nothing recycled. And it brought the historical battles and the European maps, which are these houses, which basically you ally with them and they bring units and technologies, but also have each one has their own power. And basically a completely new continent, so it was a lot of content. So it was a really good expansion. We don't know if the new DLC will have the same standards because it's in Europe again, so people don't know what else they could bring to the table. But two new civilizations is always nice, right?
Absolutely. Wow, there's so much to go over there. First of all, Malta being an asset flip is kind of how I feel about what they did with the Romans in AoE 2. I've been wanting the Romans in the game forever, and it really feels quite lazy the way they implemented some of the elements from it, especially the goddamn Centurion. But that's me being salty.
Yeah,
The
like we don't want to be mean, but
yeah, exactly. I'm happy we have the Romans. I just think they were implemented suboptimally. Something I mentioned earlier that I'd love to hear your thoughts on is fan-made content, especially things like fan-made campaigns, plus mods like your own. Obviously, AoE2 has a enormous campaign creation community, and I bet a lot of people who would be coming to AoE3 from AoE2 would be maybe interested in seeing that sort of thing in the game as well. What would someone be able to look for or expect if they were just getting into AoE3 and starting to look for fan-made content?
Oh, yeah, terribly sorry about that. I interrupted you like 2 or 3 times.
No, totally fine. Important points every time.
Age of Empires 3 is in a really strange position, which is in which it is the only game in the saga where you can bring new civilizations to the game, completely functional.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But so that's the good news. The bad news is that the scenario editor was not updated for the definitive edition. So trying to
Shit.
make new campaigns is really, really hard.
Damn, it's so unfortunate.
In the old days of Wars of Liberty, we attempted to make a new campaign. We had released 3 scenarios, which are, I don't, as far as I remember, they weren't voices. They had some script. They are functional, although not really entertaining, in my opinion. There's some out there, but they are for the old version of the game, so a lot of it is really, really old.
And I just realized Definitive Edition has a free-to-play model, right?
Right. Although you cannot install mods, just be warned for the people hearing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, not being able to install mods is, I think, pretty reasonable for a free-to-play version of the game.
The Definitive Edition has a few big mods. There's Edge of the World, which is not trying to be like historical. It's more like trying to be fun. So you never know what it's coming to you, but you can have fun with it. There's also Age of Pirates, which doesn't bring new civilizations. What they do is bring new random maps. So they make these new like native sites, like I mentioned, but they are really complex. Like they're like mini civilizations in and on themselves.
So it sounds like the engine in some regards is incredibly powerful and in other regards is very limited.
I'd almost say that it's not that the engine is not powerful, that it needs better documentation, because the files for the scenario editor, they are basically the same as they were in 2005. A lot of modding in Age of Empires 3 is basically modifying the XML tables, so it's less like complex programming work and more like memorizing what each variable does.
Are there any other major topics that you want to cover? Because if not, I have a kind of closer that I'd like to ask of you.
There's a lot of things that I have glossed over just because of how complex the game is.
Of course. That's going to always have to happen. Unless people want to listen to us talk for 4 hours, I think we're always going to have to gloss over things.
I don't think there's anything important I need to say. African civilization design, chef's kiss. I love how they approaches them. I love how it's not made like exotic. They didn't bring like anything like magical or mystical about them.
Good.
It's just like more anthropological, which is in complete contrast with ancients, where instead of an explorer, you have like monks that fight, and you build the Taj Mahal in the middle of nowhere. Everything about ancients is like that, but it's probably a topic for a different video.
So, I'm glad they did Africa well. I love African history, so I'm glad to see it done well. If a person came to you and said, "Hey, I'm trying to get into AoE3," what are like the first, let's say, 5 things, or the most important 5 things you would tell them, assuming that they weren't trying to do anything super specific, like they weren't trying to get into competitive necessarily, they just wanted to like immerse themselves in the game. Someone coming from AoE2, let's say.
Oh, okay. The basics are mostly the same. Take your time to explore the game. There's Art of War, which was brought in for the definitive edition, much like in HFS2. You can try those to get more acquainted with the game. Play a few matches against computer and you will find your footing, probably. Like, there's like really easy civilizations to learn with, like the Ottomans, for example. Again, they don't need to train your villagers, so hitting your timings is much easier. Have fun. Don't take it too seriously.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
You will only get mad if you try. The game is not as dead as people like to complain about. Like, it pales in comparison to the numbers HFS2 pulls, but Age of Empires 2 is close, if not the most played real-time strategy games nowadays. It's not a dead game by any means. You can easily find 6,000 players on your average weekend.
The last thing I wanted to ask you is where can people find your work and how can people learn more about your mod and support you?
Excellent question. So I stopped working on Wars of Liberty in 2019. I started slowly making my own mods in 2022. If everything goes well, my first mod may come out before this video gets published, which is the Philippines.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yes, a completely new civilization. I recorded voice lines for all the units. Oh yeah, this is a thing for HFI 3. Each unit has their own voice line. It's not shared between all the units.
Yes. I recently participated in Iron Kaiser's Better English Voice Acting mod, so I did learn that.
Yes, I had to record voice lines in 5 different languages.
Jeez.
Because the Philippines doesn't speak one. Gonna be streaming new civilization work on Twitch, twitch.tv/ChambeQ. Because that's easier to pronounce in English. After the Philippines mod, I'm working on an Argentina mod.
Nice.
And I'll be working on Chile and Madagascar. I love a lot of the history of Madagascar. Did you know they industrialized at the beginning of the 19th century?
You're shitting me. That's incredible. I have always been fascinated by Madagascar, but have never had the time to dive into it, and that's really interesting. And I'm really glad that you're back to making mods, man.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to. Wars of Liberty still exists, but it's for the older version of the game. You will need the 2013, I think it's called in Steam. As far as I know, there's no plans to port it to Definitive Edition. I don't plan to port it. I want to do my own thing.
Thank you so much for taking the time. You've taught me a lot, and I feel like I have at least something of a better handle on the game. And it definitely makes me excited and interested, at the very least, in looking into it further and, you know, maybe doing something on the channel with AoE3 more going forwards. Any final thoughts, or are you feeling good and ready to sign off?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I love playing Age of Empires 3. It's my favorite game. I love how it's the only game in the saga that allows to add new civilizations. So yeah, looking forward to see the reaction to this video. Hopefully we can collaborate on something later. It was fun.
Excellent. I'm very glad to hear you say it. It has been an honor to speak to you, ChambeQ, and I thank you so much for taking the time. I cannot wait to talk more about Age of Empires 3 and other games besides with you in future. But until then, my name is Robbie Howell, and ciao for now.